Like when I was in 5th, 6th, 7th grade, we didn't really have too much money. And this friend of mine, Melvin, used to be super generous to me, right? When he'd go out, like it wasn't any, like he wouldn't even expect me to pay. Convinced Dave and Jerry to start off the Yahoo Employee Foundation with $1 million, and this was like 25 years ago or so, right? So that's when I decided to join a nonprofit in San Francisco to lead their technology efforts. And then so in Feb 2003, Devan and Neera drove from Houston, Texas, like 2,000 miles to come visit us. They didn't tell me. I didn't hear about this story till like 3 or 4 years ago when Deval told me this story, right? Just because you've run a successful startup does not mean you know a lot more about, say, teaching children or the work that Vishal at Waste Warriors is doing, etc., and why he's doing it, right? And in philanthropy, I think, unfortunately, many of us do think that we are the experts and we know, and we want to give a lot of gyan to NGOs without really knowing who they are and what they do and why they do it.
Hello, namaskar. My name is Amit Varshne, and welcome to Impactful Journeys. Today's guest is someone I'm so excited to be talking to. He is a very unique individual that makes an impact in so many different ways. And in a few minutes, you'll see why. So, welcome, Donald. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, and thanks for having me on this podcast, Amit. Really glad to
Thanks.
be
So,
having
first
this
of all,
conversation.
of course. I'm telling you, it's almost like a fanboy moment for me because every time I've met you, I've come back so inspired. But first of all, what do you prefer being called, Donald or Lobo? I've heard different people say different things.
Lobo's preferred, but I'm old enough
Lobo's
right now that either one is fine. Like it's like you can call me what you want.
So, but I'll go with Lobo if that's
Yeah.
what's preferred. So, Lobo, there's just so much, like I said, there's just so much that you have an impact, and you're a very unique um, sort of contributor to the sector. If I may understand it right, you're an active, established philanthropist. You're a nonprofit leader. You're an architect slash leader of a platform that is catalyzing impact for so many in the ecosystem across multiple sectors. You're also a holistic volunteer on top of that. And the part that strikes me the most is the humility, not just in the personality, but in the way you really contribute. What drives you? There's just so much. And in fact, you know what? Before we get into the what drives you part, we'll get there. But I think we want to pull you away from the back of the room where you prefer to be all the time. Uh, we want to know more about you. We want to know everything. Where did you grow up? Your education, your early career. Tell us all, please.
Yeah, sure. But before I get into it, right, means I would say that there's lots of merit in staying in the back of the bus, right? The seats are more comfortable, you get to be by yourself, etc. So I strongly encourage people like to go to the back of the bus and hang out there. Like all the cool
Yeah,
people hang out there.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
let's see. Again, like with many Indian immigrants, especially from my generation, grew up in what at that point in time I thought was a lower middle class family, but now I think of it very differently, and we'll come back to it later on, right? But grew up in a very stable household. Had two brothers and one sister, so there were four of us. Dad started off as a bellboy at Taj, the Taj Group of hotels, and over a period, as we are growing up, grew up in the ranks and ended up as a senior executive. But growing up, I think we had enough on the table. We were well fed, well taken care of, and got a decent education.
And which city was this, Lobo?
So we were in Mumbai,
Mumbai.
and more specifically in Colaba. And these days, I really hesitate to even say that, right?
Yeah,
Primarily
I
because of
know. I
Mumbai.
know.
Like the minute
Yeah,
and this has happened only the past 2 years. The minute you talk about Colaba, everyone
yeah.
says like, "Oh, you're a sobo," or like a,
Sobo. Yeah, I
and
know.
it's
I
like
know. I know.
you
It
really don't
there's
know my life story.
yes,
And maybe I
correct,
should,
correct,
yeah.
correct, correct.
But we stayed in company housing for a large part of my childhood, and Taj
Got it.
was in South Bombay, and that's why we were in South Bombay.
Got it.
And then we
Got
are
it.
lucky enough that my parents could kind of scrimp and buy a house, etc., an apartment.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but you were saying, so the education part you were getting to, and you know,
Yeah.
yeah.
So went to a Catholic school in Mumbai, which was very common in our day and age. Then went to Saint Xavier's in Mumbai also. Um, in my During my childhood, I wasn't very smart, or wasn't very bright per se, and I think my parents had actually given up on me. And I don't know what happened between. You're laughing, but I'm actually serious about it, right?
Well, I know, but I think the reason I'm also laughing is because there's this whole stereotypical assessment of what smart in India is. There's only certain things that if you do, you consider it smart, but everything else, which is so much more comprehensive in terms of intelligence, is not really taken into account. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's the reason I was laughing.
But if you talk to my mom, she'll say that I was really, really dumb when I was a kid. So much so that she had to come in and actually fill in the alphabets for me for my kindergarten so that I could get into kindergarten, right? But I don't know what happened to me between the seventh and eighth grade, right? And so somehow in the eighth grade, everything clicked together. And then I started doing fairly well in college, fairly well in school, did fairly well in college, got admission into an NIT. Um,
And which
went
NIT was this?
NIT Varangal. That was in
Warangal,
Andhra Pradesh at that point in time.
REC Warangal at
Yeah,
that time.
it was
Yeah, yeah.
REC Varangal at that point. Oh wow, you know your history
Oh yeah,
there.
of course. No, no, of course. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. RC Warangal is a well-known college.
So it was a good. I mean, I'm glad that I managed that I left home, right? Because I
Hmm.
think college really, as you know, with your kids, right, and that's what I wanted my kids also to do. Like after high school, it's time for kids to kind of forge their own path, and it really
Right.
helps you grow as an individual.
Yeah. Yeah.
And did fairly well in college for 4 years. Was quite driven and motivated. And luckily for me, a couple of universities in the US were willing to pay for me to come and study here. So which I did. Got my master's out here at Penn State. Grateful to them for sponsoring my education, and then I went to transfer to the University of Washington, Seattle, to do my PhD.
Oh, wonderful. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But luckily for me, my advisor and I got into a conflict where I wanted to go back to my old summer job at IBM. He wanted me to go to a startup in Silicon Valley, and since he was going to be my advisor, I said, "Okay, I better listen to you." And since I'm a good Indian boy, I figured like I might have to keep my advisor happy. So I went to a
Yeah.
startup in Silicon Valley, which
Hmm.
probably was the best decision of my life because I never went back to school after that.
Right. Right.
So I stayed in the startup, and that's where I met the founders of Yahoo and some of the early Yahoo employees. And when Yahoo got funding in 94 or 95, I was one of the first employees, along with a good friend of mine, Tim Brady, to join the company with Philo and Jerry, the two
And so,
founders.
just situate us a little bit here. So, the startup that you joined in the Bay Area, what time is that? Around 92, 93?
Yeah, that was
Is
around
that
92. Yeah, that was
92?
92, the summer of 92, if I'm not
Got it.
mistaken. I might be
Got it.
off by a year, but I'm 90. Yeah, it was the summer of 92.
Got it. So
Yeah.
92 to 94, you were there, but then you bump
Yeah.
into the
Yeah. And
Yahoo
then the startup
founders.
got acquired by a really large company. And in my life, I've had two bosses, right? And my first boss at the startup was this amazing person called Jim Rawson, who I'm super grateful to. And when we were bought by this large company, Cadence Design Systems, which is still
Uh huh.
quite large,
Right.
um, they really didn't know what to do with us other than like to kill the products, right? So
Got
they
it.
killed the products, but we didn't really have any work to do while
Hmm.
they were figuring out what to do with us.
Hmm.
And so he basically told me, go do what you want, like go learn what you want. At that time,
Hmm.
Windows was the hot thing, Windows and Delphi and Pascal, Visual Pascal, or something
Yes.
like all those
Yeah.
visual languages, right?
Right.
So
Right.
he
Right.
basically gave me a blank checkbook and said, "Go
Wow.
spend it."
Wow.
And so I would go
Wow.
to Fry's and get all the latest software and play around with it. So I had a year of fun, and at the same time, I was also doing a fair bit of volunteering at a homeless shelter, doing a bunch of stuff with Asha for education. at the Stanford chapter. At that time, it was really small,
Very small.
etc.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so I had enough time in my hands, and I think I also started doing work with inner city outings where we would take kids from the inner cities out to the forests and the mountains and the ocean. So those were, I mean, Jim was an incredibly influential boss. And when I was interviewing with Yahoo, since I was the first employee, since Tim and I were the first employees there, and the founders were our friends, we were negotiating with the VC, who was
Mm-hmm.
Michael Moritz from Sequoia Cap,
Oh,
uh,
okay.
who turned out to be a really good friend and supporter later on in life also. Um, and Jim would basically pull me into a room 1 hour before I'd have to go meet Mike and basically tell
Mm.
me what to ask him and what questions
Mm.
to ask and how to
Mm.
negotiate with him.
Mm.
Because
Oh,
Mike had
wow.
also, Sequoia had also funded a previous startup
Got it. Got it. So, what role were you playing, Lobo, in all of this
in at Yahoo or at the
at
pre.
Yahoo? At Yahoo.
So at that time, you did anything and everything that you needed to do to survive, right?
Right. Okay. Got
Because
it. Got it.
those were 16-hour days.
Right.
Like you spend Thanksgiving in the office, you spend Christmas in the office, and I still remember the Thanksgiving dinner that Philo and I went for, right? And there might have been one more yeah, I don't know if there was someone else. And we went to this Chinese place, and it was probably the worst meal of my life. Like the chicken was raw, and it was like we look at each other and we say
Right.
like thinking
What's
to
going?
ourselves like, what are we doing in life, right?
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
this where we want to be in, like?
Right.
Oh, and
Mm.
but we were having a lot of fun. But most of my Indian friends and colleagues, right, like really thought I had gone crazy
Mm.
about like giving up a well-established job to join this thing called the internet, which everyone was convinced was going to go bust in
Yeah.
the next
Yeah.
6 months.
Right.
And we would, when we'd hire people, what our guarantee to them was, we weren't sure whether we were going to be alive in 6 months,
Uh,
but
and
we knew you were going to have the best time of your life, right?
and at this time, Yahoo was the sort of the idea that it was working on was it would be the directory of the internet. Was that had come about, or
Yeah, it was
what
the
was sort of
directory.
the
It was
yeah?
the directory of the internet at that
Okay.
point in
Okay.
time, right? Then there was a bunch of us. There was the founder Larry Augustin, who was the founder of VA Linux. A couple of the other founders of other internet startups. All of us would kind of meet at the Stanford campus, and Mozilla, not Mozilla. Netscape had just come out
Netscape.
from
Yeah. Yeah.
Andreessen at UIUC, I think,
Yeah.
right? And all of us were kept thinking like, we've got to start a business. We've got to start a business. Now is the time to do it.
Got it.
And Dave and Jerry were doing Yahoo on the side, saying like, okay, this is kind of keeping us entertained.
Got it. Got it.
And
Got it.
then when Mike approached them to fund them,
Yeah.
that's how it all started.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Got it. Got it. So then it looks like you always had this social responsibility part to you, right? You were saying you were involved with Asha, you were involved with the inner city work, so on. But then, how did you tell us a little bit more about how then did you make that harder switch? Was it just with the acquisition, or was sort of with the IPO of Yahoo, or how did that go about? So just walk us through that a little bit, but also your journey at Yahoo.
Yeah, so Yahoo was amazing, right? It was a blast. We had a lot of fun. The first 10 to 20 employees, we were incredibly close, primarily because we were spending like 14 hours a day
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
office with each other, right? And the story that I always like to repeat is, I would leave the office at 12 a.m. In the morning, right? And pretty much the entire group of like 6 to 7 engineers would come out and wave me good night as I was driving home. All right, in a very mocking way, saying like, "Do you?" Right? And I would kind of give them the middle finger and says, "Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah." But when I come back at 6 a.m., none
Yeah,
of y'all are
you
going to
guys will
be
be
there.
sleeping. Yeah.
Y'all aren't going to come until 10 a.m. So it was a really
Right.
strong knit of people, and
Hmm.
luckily for me, like pretty much all of them have been funding my work in the social sector till today. So they've been my strongest supporters, and without blinking an eyelid, they'll write a check for whatever amount I ask them, right? Because that trust factor has been there. So I'm really grateful for that network
Got
to
it.
be
Got it.
supporting me so strongly, even after 20 plus years.
Got it.
Um,
So
yes.
then the journey at Yahoo, when did you step back from that, and then
So we
was
yeah
it
so
it
yeah
switched to?
so at Yahoo we went public in a year and a half or so. we were we did offer pre-public stock to many of the open source
Hmm.
companies that we
Hmm.
worked with, right? Many
I
of the
see.
open source organizations, so like the the free BSD community, the Perl community. Perl was the hot language at that
Yeah,
point in
yeah.
time.
PEL, yeah.
And like they didn't believe us when we gave them stock, right? When we said like, you're as much responsible for our success as we are, so we want to
Hmm.
thank you.
Hmm. Hmm.
And we started an incredibly generous employee matching program at Yahoo, which was very strange at that point in time. It
At
was
that
quite
point,
common in Silicon Valley. Right now, I think
now,
Cadence
yeah.
at that point in time was giving 1,000, and we convinced management like we've got to give at least 5,000 in matching.
Wow,
Right?
wow,
When can we
wow.
give more? Uh, Convinced Dave and Jerry to start off the Yahoo Employee Foundation with $1 million, and this was like 25 years ago or so, right? Or 20 years, no, actually no, 30 years ago now, close to 30 years ago. And that was again one of the first things which wasn't very common in many organizations. And again, Dave and Jerry were super generous, started the Yahoo Employee Foundation, and employees were giving money and were involved in the local ecosystem, right? So was quite influential out there and made that happen. Um, so spent 7 to 8 years at Yahoo. Then 1.0 imploded. Yahoo had grown to 3,000 or so. We were one of the few survivors out there, but it seemed like I had done enough, and it was time for me to kind of go explore other opportunities, and I could figure out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. Right, I mean,
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
again, I was in the right place, right time, right group of friends. Had made some amount of money that I didn't really have to worry about what I could do.
Right, right.
Spoke to a few startups, but realized like, hey, if I want to make the switch to the social sector, now's as good a time as any.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then
Hmm.
spoke
Hmm.
around a bit in the social sector to see what I could do. Foundations seemed to be like the cool thing to do, but didn't seem to be very attractive. Seemed to be a bit of a bore. So that's when I decided to join a nonprofit in San Francisco to lead their technology efforts, and they were one of the first SaaS, software as a service nonprofits, helping organizations with donation management and email management.
Oh,
It
interesting.
was
And so this is around the 2002, 2003 time frame?
Yeah, this was 2003 to 2005.
Oh, got it,
Yeah.
got it.
Uh,
And does that organization still exist?
It was bought by Network for Good,
Network for Good.
etc.
Got
Yeah,
it.
and that's where I first ran into Omedia. Right, that's when eBay and Pierre had first
Yeah,
started
yeah.
funding groups, and Omedia funded our organization in a fairly big way. And
Got it,
weirdly enough,
got
the
it.
cycle kind of turned around, and Omedia funded us very recently. Like when I say recently, 2 years ago, also in a very big way for Tech for Dev. So
For
like
Tech for Dev.
life to me is a really nice lucky cycle, right? Where I meet people, where I work with people that I like, and I intersect with people all the time from the past.
Wonderful. So the it's not that it's an overnight sort of realization that I need to be part of the social sector. I see this pattern all through, right from before Yahoo, you personally were involved, and all of the sort of members at Yahoo made this conscious decision, influenced the founders to build that Yahoo Family Foundation, Yahoo Employee Foundation, I'm sorry, and then continue to increase their involvement. And once you felt, you know what, I can figure out what to do with my life, you went on, you know, you doubled down on that and went deeper. Um, so this the Chintu Gudiya Foundation, I think that's what the family foundation is called. Tell us a little bit about when that started, and what was that initial journey like? What was your thought process in setting it up?
Yeah, so that I would call a parallel track of all what I just described, right? So when Yahoo went public, so I think we started Chintu Gudiya Foundation in 1999,
Hmm.
and the only reason we called it Chintu Gudiya is because around the same time, maybe in the 93, 94 era, my sister and brother both had a kid, and their nicknames were Chintu and Gudiya.
I
And since we
see. I
didn't
was
want
about to ask you that. Okay, got it, got
and
it, got it.
since we didn't want to call it the Lobo Foundation or
Hmm.
anything like that, we figured like giving it one level of indirection gives you a fair bit of privacy. So for the
Hmm.
first
Hmm.
10 years, all our donations were anonymous. right? In the sense that we didn't tell anyone what we were
Hmm.
doing.
Hmm.
And I'll come back to why we changed our mind on that sometime
Hmm.
during this conversation. Uh,
Hmm.
so again, because we had enough stock from a tax perspective, and since we knew we wanted to give most of it away anyway, and this
Hmm.
was even before we had kids. And luckily for me, me and my wife kind of agreed on many of these things, like including this, that we'd give a fair bit away. We'd adopt a child irrespective of what happens. We'll either adopt both our kids, we'll adopt two kids, or we'll adopt one kid if we can have one kid, etc. So we were aligned in many ways. So that really helps a whole lot. Um, so started the foundation in 99 or so. And funded it with a bunch of Yahoo stock and kept adding to it. Like even today, we keep adding money to, and mainly means as a combination of both tax purposes and for long term giving. As you know, in the US, it's fairly advantageous. Like
Yeah.
for every dollar you give away, right, you're actually giving away just 66 cents. Means my math might be
Yeah.
off.
No, but you're right.
But
That's
you're
around
giving
right.
away like 66 to 70
Yeah.
cents, but the government is putting in 30 cents. So you might
Yeah.
as well
Yeah.
means you're still giving away money, but
Right.
you're also optimizing on what the state can give,
Correct.
etc.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
So we started this foundation, and in 2003, and so we were doing a lot of work with taking kids to the outdoors, etc., and that was incredibly satisfying. And we were also doing a lot of stuff outdoors, right? So we do backpacking trips, kayaking trips, etc. um, and I really wanted to fund something outdoorsy in India, like get kids outside in India. And I was
Hmm.
doing a web
Hmm.
search at that point in time, and
Hmm.
I ran into this organization called the Magic Bus Foundation.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I sent mail to info@magicbus or whatever that email address was. And weirdly enough, like I would say 90% of my emails that I send to such emails don't get response,
Yeah.
which is so strange, right?
I know.
But luckily for me, Deval responded because Deval was managing that email account, and
Account.
we started talking to each other over email. I don't even know if he talked on the phone because I really don't like talking on the phone. I mean, my phone is on permanent silence. If you like, all right, all right. So then Deval said, and so then I started talking to Deval about things, and then he said, "Can we come meet you?" And we
Hmm.
just had our and the only reason why I remember the dates are primarily because we just had our first kid. So Maya was born
Oh.
in Jan 2003, and then so in Feb 2003, Deval and Neera drove from Houston, Texas, like 2,000 miles to come visit us. In Yeah.
Wow.
They didn't
Wow.
tell me. I didn't hear about this story till like 3 or 4 years ago when Deval told
Wow.
me this story, right? And they had to drive primarily because they didn't have money to fly. Right.
Wow.
And since we have a decent sized house, we said, yeah, you can come crash with us, right? We have a house, but we don't have furniture, so you'll have to sleep on the floor or something like that, right? So it was really good to have these conversations with them. They were just moving to India, and I said, yeah, you can take care of a fella, you can take care of giving in India for us, right?
Hmm.
And we
Hmm.
are more than
Hmm.
happy to support y'all. So our relationship with Dasra, with Deval and Neera, have been amazing mentors and
Hmm.
friends,
Hmm. Hmm.
and co-partners and co-creators. So super grateful for them. And to a large extent, what we are doing today lives, not to a large extent, actually, Tech for Dev is a vertical under Dasra from a legal and financial perspective. So our relationship is super strong out there. And yeah, so they helped us with our giving in India till 2015 or so. Till I switched back and started doing a lot more work with Indian NGOs. But I would say for the first 10 years, to put it mildly, right? And I don't know what the use of profanity in this
Please
podcast is,
go right ahead.
but I would consider myself like a I was really busy with the project that I was running, right? Which at that point in time was CiviCRM, and to me that was the world, right? And I didn't really
Hmm.
have time
Hmm.
for anything. So to a
Hmm.
large extent, from a giving perspective, I was kind of like an asshole giver, right? It
Hmm.
wasn't very
Hmm.
important to me,
Hmm.
right? And it was more of a burden than anything else, and I just didn't
Hmm.
want to talk about it, right? We were putting aside money. We knew we wanted to give, but it just wasn't important.
Hmm.
And Deval can probably give you lots more stories about how bad I was. Right? Yeah, means and I always and so I relate a lot like when Silicon Valley founders or people who have made enough money, right? That when it's not a priority for them.
Yeah.
Primarily because if
Yeah.
there's some more interesting things in your life, right? It's like at some point in time the wheels will churn and it will become a priority, but
So, but
Yeah.
that's an interesting thing that you mentioned, Lobo, right? And you're so honest about it. What I notice is that, you speak with people who have the ability to give. There is that desire, right? Yeah, I want to give, or I want to contribute, and this is something I really want to do. The difference between thought and action, there's a big chasm there, and that's where a lot of things just stay as thoughts. And so you point out an interesting perspective to that, which is that it's not for a lack of anything else, but just that there's other things that are more interesting at this point. However, it's also important to note that all through your life, it has not been left at the thought level only. You have taken small steps all along, and they may have formed your later decisions. But I just want you to talk a little bit more about why, or what do you think has been the reason that from the very beginning you have made a choice to be involved and to volunteer and to involve yourself in whatever small ways that you can. And what do you think is sort of that nugget to get where people are thinking, okay, well, I don't know, I'll do it later. What is the right thing that they should take back from your sort of journey?
Um, So I have no idea what the answer to your question is, right? I keep thinking about it, like what was the turning point, etc. Means, and to me, at least, what might have been the turning point is, as I mentioned, in my childhood, right? Like when I was in fifth, sixth, seventh grade, we didn't really have too much money, right? So we, like, the pocket money, we couldn't go out to eat with my friends or something. Like
Mm-hmm.
that wasn't
Yep.
really an option for most of the time, right?
Yep. Yep.
But I had this super generous friend whose dad was a shippy, and I mean, so you grew up in India, Amit, so you
Yeah.
probably know this, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
shippies in general made a decent
Made
amount of
more
money, and the
money.
kids had
Correct.
some money. And
Yeah.
this friend of mine, Melvin, used to be super generous to me, right? When he'd
Mhm.
go out, like it wasn't any, like he wouldn't even expect me to pay,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And so I think, and we had a couple of uncles and everything who, though they didn't have any money, were as generous could be to us, right? So I think these factors kind of just sowed a seed of, and here I'm in total speculation land, right?
Yeah.
As to why things happen, but I really have no idea as to when the switch flipped. So that's why even when I talk to many Silicon Valley founders, etc., it's like I keep telling them, like, do it at your time when you think you're ready for it. Like, listen, but just talk to people, like listen to their stories, like give them, like, if you have the time and the inclination, give them an hour, but you'll do it at the time when it's right for you, and you can't really push people. And I think they will especially um, uh, epitomizes this in a really good manner, right? Because for him, and even for me, and I've learned a lot from him, it's a long term game, right? You can't push
Mm-hmm.
people into doing this, right?
Right.
They'll do
Right.
it when they're ready. They'll do
Right.
it when some certain factors influence, like various actions happen in their life, right?
Yeah.
As
Yeah.
long as you expose them, as long as you kind of educate them, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Without and necessarily thinking like, I'm going to educate you in the hope that you're going to turn around tomorrow and give a check. No, I mean, so many a times we'll host these dinners, especially with Dasra, where we'll invite a bunch of folks just to come and learn about stuff, right? There'll never be
Mm.
an explicit ask, because we don't know, and we actually make it and we tell people, like, no one will ask you for a check, right? You're not
Yeah.
expected to give, right?
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
come and talk to people, and you may or may not find the work interesting. If you find the work interesting, carry on the conversation with them, right?
So, Lobo, there's a couple of things that I gather from this, and this is sort of the kind of pattern I've seen as well, speaking to many other people that contribute. Um, One is, I think, like you said, just to summarize, is that no pressure thing. It is not about pressurizing, or sort of not pressurizing, but having that expectation on me that I need to do something, right? When that is lowered, then I wade into the pool with a lot more comfort, and I wade into it at my own pace. That's number one. And related to that, I think the other part is that no contribution is small enough. The reason for that is, I think the common pattern I've seen is because either while growing up or earlier in their life, people got that assist from others in, again, small ways, either monetary or even in terms of support, emotional support, that just gave them that comfort and gave them that leg up, and now they want to pay it forward. And I think paying it forward is also a great motivation. It does not have to be that you're a quote unquote philanthropist who's putting in a writing a large check. It is just that support that you can provide makes it pay it forward. And again, you are getting into it at a low with low expectations. Does that sort of make sense to you? Does that sound of right, or does that sort of
Yeah,
summarize it?
it sounds totally up the and I think those are two of the many ways, right? And I think there are lots of other ways that different people have different journeys.
Yeah,
And I'm running this interesting experiment, right? Means I won't be able to tell you the results for the next 5 to 10 years. Like
sure.
I've grown up with these friends, like just like you, right? You probably
Yeah,
now know quite a few young adults who are making their job, right? And I'll keep
right.
kind of reminding them that it's their duty to give back to society,
Yes,
right?
yes, yes.
But I'm not asking them for a check right now, right? If they want to
Correct,
give us a check right now, great.
correct,
I'll gladly accept it. But I do
correct,
know that all of them will give back at some point in time, right?
correct,
Even small
correct,
amounts, right? So I think we've
correct.
got to look at it as just a long-term game, a long-term evolution, and just kind of opening people's eyes to it, right?
Mm,
Means the one
mm,
thing which I'm
mm.
really glad that we did with our kids when we were young. Is we took them, we would go to India on these volunteering
Yeah,
trips,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
And to me, that was such eye-opening lessons, right? Our
Yes.
kids learned about what poverty is, what hunger really means, right?
Right, right,
What
right.
basically going to bed on an empty stomach because the
Mm,
dinner wasn't ready,
correct,
right?
correct, correct,
was
correct.
were really good lessons, and unless you
Yeah.
experience it, and I means and no ways am I trying to imply that I've experienced it all. Means what we've
No,
experienced is just a small fraction of what people go through, right?
I
But I think
totally
it's
see that.
really important for people to go out there in the field and see how rural India
Yeah,
operates, right? Or not
yeah.
even rural India. I was speaking to this young man today in the Bay Area, who wanted to get involved with Indian organizations. And I told him, like, forget India for now, right? Like, you're in the Bay Area, you're relatively young. Go spend a few hours every week with nonprofits in the US, right? Because what's happening in the US or what's happening in any part of the world is
Yeah,
the same
yeah.
as what's
It
happening
is
in
the
India.
same. Yeah, it
But it
is
gives you a
across the
lot
world.
more satisfaction because it's a lot more concrete, it's a lot more real, right? For you to
Mm,
try to
mm,
think
mm,
about doing stuff in India from out here, especially early
mm,
on,
mm. Yeah.
is really hard, right? Because
Okay.
it's so abstract.
Yep.
Whereas when you're
Yep.
going and helping a kid read or doing math or distributing food or whatever type of volunteering gigs are there,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's so cool, right? You get immediate satisfaction, and I think that's
Absolutely.
what
There's
people
so much
need
we
to.
get back. I mean, immediately. There's so much more for us than for whatever our notional feeling is that we're doing it for others. But you just immediately get a payback.
Yeah.
Um, so you said there's multiple ways that multiple journeys people may have in their journey. But let me maybe ask you another way. If there was, and please humor me for a second, not whether the idea is good or not, but if there were a finishing school for philanthropists, people who can give, right? What are the courses that one should have? What are the kind of things that philanthropists or people who are donating that they should know before they even do their first act? Are there certain things that you want them to really be very conscious and clear about?
So here's what I've learned in the past 20-25 years, right? And I'm going to be a bit rude out here, right?
Yes, I
So I
expect you to.
think um, So I think to a large extent, think of philanthropy very similar to the way you handle your financials, right?
Hmm,
There's
hmm,
some people who are really into the stock market, who really are into investing and figuring out how to structure how their savings are going to, and would feel that would think that they're good at it, right?
hmm,
Hopefully, some of them are fairly good at it, etc., right? And then there's some people who don't give a damn about it,
hmm,
right? I'm in the latter category,
hmm,
and people in the latter category, and many even in the former category, will put things in mutual funds and trusts
hmm,
and for fixed income or in index funds, etc., right? But if you know that you're not interested in the financial markets, you're going to allow a financial advisor, especially once you get above a certain level of wealth, right? And if
hmm,
not, then
hmm.
you're just going to rely on index funds,
Yeah,
which are actually proven to be
very
as
good.
good, if not even better
Better
than
strategy.
advisors, right? So you could argue
Correct.
about that.
Yeah.
Um, but so you'd outsource it to someone who knows way more about it,
Hmm,
right? So
hmm,
my theory about philanthropy is very similar, right? If you're just
hmm,
willing, like if I look at my first 10 years, the only smart decision, like the 2005 to 2015, the only smart decision that we made was we knew that all the times we'd go to India and go visit the NGOs, we knew
Hmm.
we didn't know anything to make any decisions. So
Right.
we
Right.
outsourced all our decisions to Dasra, right? And Deval and Neera
Correct.
and their team did an amazing job.
Right. Right.
All right.
Right.
So what I tell people who have a certain amount to give is like, if you're not going to spend a decent amount of time,
Hmm. Hmm.
then just
Hmm.
let someone else help you with it,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
let them decide, right? And then they can come
Right.
back to you with proposals, and they can come back to you with various options, and you decide it. You don't need to become an expert. Like, all of us cannot become experts. And in
Yeah.
philanthropy, I think unfortunately many of us do think that we are the experts, and we know, and
Yes.
we want to give a lot of gyan to NGOs
Yeah.
without really
Yeah.
knowing who they are and what they are and what they do and why they do it.
Correct.
Which I think is totally bogus, right? So I do want people to kind of take a step back and see, like, do I know enough? Right? Just because you've run a successful startup does not mean you know a lot more about, say, teaching children, or the work that Vishal at Waste Warriors is doing, etc., and why he's doing
Right.
it, right?
Right. Right.
So I think knowing what you know and capitalizing on that is really important. And then the second, but for people who want to take the next level up and who want to educate themselves, right? There's so many options, and I've also got a reading list. Like, I got this request so many times, and then I kept track of the list of books and videos, and magazines and newsletters that I read, that have really influenced me a wee bit. So I've got a reading list about some really influential books, right? Things like the work that Abhijit and Esther Duflo have
Mm-hmm.
done at MIT with poor economics,
Yep.
or the IPA story. There's so
Right.
many amazing stories and so much literature out there that you should definitely read and upskill yourself.
And we will
Uh,
include that in the notes to this podcast, if that's okay with you,
Yeah,
Ram.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. All these are
Yeah.
public documents, right? But I would
Yeah.
say, like, if you're willing to educate yourself, right, then that's the next level. And this is hierarchy, right? If
Mm-hmm.
you're willing to give an hour a month or 2 hours a month, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially now that we are done with COVID,
Mm-hmm.
fingers crossed. Though
Fingers
seems like
crossed.
everyone seems to be getting COVID again. Both my kids had
Yeah.
COVID in the past month.
Oh, really? Oh, my goodness. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like,
My daughter did too, like 3 months back, but I didn't realize. Oh, yeah. It keeps
yeah, my
popping
old
up again and again. Yeah.
Yeah, my older kid just called me 2 hours ago saying, like, "Oh,
Oh, goodness.
I've got COVID."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but the next thing is, there's so many amazing Indian leaders who go through the Bay Area, right?
Yeah.
Being willing to give an hour of your time
Hmm.
to learn more about it, to have a conversation with them in a very open way, and hopefully you buying them coffee or lunch or dinner, right? Don't make them pay for it. I've heard
Exactly.
stories about where there means people have made NGO leaders pay for it, right? It's like, dude, look at the difference between an Indian rupee and a US dollar. Like, think about it. Um,
Yeah.
but just going and talking to people, right? The one thing which I encourage many people to give is, especially people like us, right, who've come from lower to middle class backgrounds. uh, Many of us think that education is the way out, right?
Hmm.
Education will
Hmm.
solve problems, and yes, I kind of semi agree with it. But there are also so many other areas that you can contribute to, that you can
Totally.
help with, right? So
Totally.
don't close your mind and don't say that I'm only going to fund education. It's
Yes.
okay for you to fund education for the first 3 to 5 years, but at least be willing to listen to other people. And don't worry, I was in the same boat. Like, for the first 10 years, even I supported education a lot, right? So I'm not drawing judgment, etc. It's just like my learning, right? So
Yeah.
these days, I would say I probably say yes to 99% of NGO leaders who come through the Bay Area. And I mean, many a times I'll even offer them a place to stay out here, right? Probably because it's a lot cheaper staying with us than staying in a hotel in the Bay Area.
So let's actually do this right now. I think from the Bay Area, I know a couple more people who do this, but this is our commitment as well. And looks like, Lobo, yours of course has been for the longest time, is that if you're an NGO leader coming from India and you're visiting the US, just let us know. All you need to do is land up at the airport. From there on, your stay, your of course every piece of your stay here is something that we'll take care of. My wife and I have made that commitment. And, you know, there's multiple people that are here who are going to play the same host and also take care of making sure that your story is told to other people in the network as well. So I think just that could be also one more way of making that contribution. You don't have to do anything else, just show up and just host and just listen to their stories. So
Yeah.
just wanted to add to that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many ways of doing it, right? And just so many, I mean, just being kind and generous is so, and you can be kind and generous in so many ways, right?
Totally.
But when people staying, I mean, just as a disclaimer, right? Like when you stay with us, it's not a free stay, right? Like if you can, if we are going to make you earn your stay
May
out here,
earn by making sure that you tell your story and talk about your work.
yeah, and if
And
you're
yeah.
and if you're a good cook, we are going to ask you to cook with us. Right? Don't worry, we have done all these things.
Well, that's a new thing for me to learn.
No, because and we have a lot of fun with
Sure,
that,
sure.
right? And
Of
luckily
course,
for us,
the whole communal feeling becomes a lot better.
yeah,
Yes, totally.
we live in a really good neighborhood, and the neighbor across both across the street and diagonally across from us, are also into nonprofit work, right? So typically,
Mm,
I'll send nonprofit leaders to their house
yeah.
to practice their pitch,
Yeah. So the
and
third thing I think, Lobo, that I'm gathering from all of this, and I'm sort of restating these because I just want to pull these points out, is the first two points that you made about how to give and give with humility, or at least just make that contribution and not assume that you know everything. You don't need to give gyan. Um, but also, I think what it does is when you start involving yourself, your circle, the people that you surround with, also that changes. And so you said earlier on, well, I've been fortunate. I would flip it around saying, well, these are the people that draw to your energy and your work. And when you start contributing with only small steps, maybe your social circle or your people around you also changes, and you become surrounded one way or the other with other people who are also kind and generous, who also want to give. And then you just grow in that journey. So I just wanted to point that out, that I noticed, and I'm noticing myself as well.
yeah. Yeah, so like just getting involved in the local ecosystem, right? The
Hmm.
one thing which I'm not a big fan of, right, is galas.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right?
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
mean, and
Hmm.
the only reason why I'm not a big fan of galas is because the primary expectation of a gala is to raise money.
Got it. Got it.
And you're
Got it.
expected to give money when you attend a gala, right? Because
So
that's a
again,
quid pro
coming
quo
back to
thing.
that thing about sort of that pressure situation, or just that expectation that you're putting the money part before actually stepping into the world. Is that how you would
And
say it?
I'm not saying anything good or bad about galas, right? But
Sure.
for us, like, and I would rarely recommend a gala to a friend also, right?
Hmm.
Primarily
Hmm.
because if I tell this friend go attend this gala, it's
Hmm.
no, I mean, because they expect, like, when people, at least here's my interpretation of a gala, the
Right.
expectation is everyone basically contributes at least something to
True.
offset the cost for sure, and
Of yeah.
hopefully a significant multiple of that, right? Though
Correct.
like organizations like Pratham, Magic Bus have incredible success hosting
Incredible
galas,
success.
and that is a tried and true method of really
Of
raising a
course.
lot of funds and a lot of money, right?
Of
But for the
course.
smaller organizations, I'm not too sure. And with Asha for Education, we used to do that. And this was 25, 30 years ago. And my main pushback to them was, the number of hours we spent on this,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
If all
Hmm.
of us had basically gone and worked at McDonald's for the
Yeah.
same number of hours, we would have made more than what we made in the gala. Right, if we had just contributed that, like, so from a logical perspective, it
Yeah.
just didn't.
Yeah.
So unless you're a Pratham or a Magic Bus which is making like 10 to 15x, and because there's
Yeah.
also, like, sometimes giving is competitive, right?
It is. Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know enough of that crowd to talk too much about it, so I'll probably just shut up on that stuff. But that's probably one of the few things where we'll explicitly tell people no, unless it's a really small gathering, right? If it's a small gathering in someone's home, then when we know that organization, then we'll probably go for it.
Got it. Got it. Got
Um,
it. Got it. Got it.
Oh, and then the final step of the giving journey for a budding philanthropist, right? And we've
Yeah.
taken quite a few people with us on India trips. Is if you have the time and money, and if you really, and this is what I told you, I think when we met like 6 to 9 months ago, right?
Correct.
Uh, when you make a trip to India, there are two types of visits you can do, right? And you should do
Hmm.
one before the other. I mean, if you can
Yeah.
do the second one first, that would be even great. One is like just going and visiting NGOs in their offices, big step
Correct.
forward, right? You
Correct.
see them
Correct.
at least. But if you can spend 2 to 3 days in the field with them, right? Like
Hmm.
living in rural, like wherever they are, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
say for Sneha in Mumbai, like if you go into Dharavi with them, or if you go
Correct.
into Govandi or all these places, right? And spend 4 to 6 hours. Like it will kind of reset what you expect, what your mindset is, what you thought you know, right?
Yes,
and
yes,
and what reality is. So spending time in the field is a fair bit of time, is a fair bit of investment, right? But when you're doing that, you also got to be respectful of what you're expecting the NGO to do for
to
you.
do.
And you've got to
Yes,
think about it from the sense that if you're expecting the NGO to host it, means I do think that you should consider making a small contribution, like whether you
totally,
agree with it
totally,
or not. Because if they are
totally.
spending time, especially for the smaller NGOs, right? For some NGOs, they can play the medium to long term game, but always think of it like if someone is spending time with you, right, it is a money issue for them, right? They are spending, so always think also from the perspective of the NGO. And many a times they will show you reality that you may or may not like, right?
Correct.
But you've got to be open minded, and you've got to mean, but that is what life is all about.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Wonderful. No, thank you so much, Lobo. I think these four steps that you talked about, I think great for anyone even remotely interested to how to start to take those steps forward and really hopefully get a lot back in terms of gratitude and the ability to pay it forward.
Yeah.
So now we'll switch to the other side of Lobo, which is the catalytic impact that you're making. And we'll probably now have to switch into our episode two, which is talking about the tech for dev, um, the Glific platform, and so much more. And so that was part one of the discussion with Donald Lobo. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. See you soon for part two. Thank you and bye bye.